There you go. That's the official notice that we have started our next workshop, Universal Design for Learning, with the wonderful Hannah Davidson. The way this will work is that we're going to ask Hannah to talk with us for about a half an hour, and then we'll have 15 minutes at the end for questions. As we go along, you can put questions into the chat. Sometimes that can get a little bit hard for us to follow, but feel free to use the chat. But we'll save most of those questions until the end, when we can ask you to unmute your mics and just go ahead and ask Hannah whatever you've got. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Hannah and off we go.
Thanks, Robin. I am going to see if I know how to share my screen first before we really get going.
I bet you do.
I think I do. Let's see.
You'll have some options when you click share screen. And
okay, I see the screen sharing. That's a good start.
Yep, and then you'll just put it in presentation mode like you normally would.
And I have to move your faces off of the screen, and then I will be able to do it. Okay. Can somebody just give me maybe Robin or Michael, because that's the only people I can see? Okay.
Thumbs up.
Excellent. All right, now I'm gonna move your faces. Great. So let's see. Okay. Well, thanks again, Robin, for the introduction, and thank you to everybody for being here today when it's the day before spring grades are due. I know that's a really busy time, but I think it's really important for us to be here to chat about how we can best support our students going forward, especially as we plan for these high flex scenarios that we've been focusing on for the last couple days in our slipper camp. So I was kind of looking around before I started sharing my screen, and I think that most of your names and faces are pretty familiar, but I think there's a few people here who don't know me. So again, I'm Hannah Davidson. I work in campus accessibility services. I'm the accessibility specialist, and my primary role is to provide accommodations for our students with disabilities. But I also teach part-time in the English department. I've been doing that for about 10 years. And I'm an affiliate partner with the CoLab, which is why I'm here. So there's a quick housekeeping thing. I dropped in the chat the link to my slides. So if you would rather follow along that way, rather than trying to watch the screen share, that's great. And then you could also have them to access later. Additionally, I dropped a link for Padlet, which is sort of like a digital sticky note, just for another avenue for people to reflect as I'm talking. So if you can jot something down and then we can go back to it towards the end of our time together. I started the Padlet with a sort of provocation of sharing your challenges during remote learning. If you want to do that, that's great. If that doesn't spark any interest for you, then feel free to talk about whatever you want on Padlet. That's okay too. And then if you would like a lower tech option, you can just jot your ideas down and we'll talk about them when we get to the last 15 minutes of our time. And then you can also use the chat as well. Or if you're a tweeting person, a tweeter, you can use the hashtag PSUOpen as well to reflect. So this next slide is just the ACE framework that Robin shared yesterday morning, and that we're using to sort of thematically link all of the presentations. And while I think that UDL and accessibility could be linked to really any of the 9 boxes we have, I highlighted a few that I felt like were particularly relevant to our conversation. Those are flexible deadlines, student design and choice, which are assignment level parts of the framework, and then same with UDL baselines, which you're going to understand more about very soon. Varied engagement channels, and then on a more institutional level, the digital divide amelioration, which I think is really important to think about as we're doing so many things remotely and relying on technology, we have to also think about who has access to that technology. Okay, so next I have a couple of provocations, and I called them provocations because I don't think that we're going to be able to answer them in any super deep or definitive way right now, but there are at least some things to kind of get our wheels turning and to focus. So that first provocation, what is UDL and why should you care? To that first provocation, what is UDL? My idea was to keep the definition real brief because we might have some folks on this the Zoom room who've never heard of UDL, but there's other people here who could probably write a book about it. So we're going to go with this definition from CAST. And CAST is a national leading organization about all things UDL. And their basic definition is an educational framework that guides the design of learning goals, materials, methods, and assessments, and policies with the diversity of learners in mind, which I think is amazingly linked to the ACE framework that we're using. I've also provided a hyperlink. I know if you're just clicking on my screen share, you can't do it, but that's why the slides are in the chat as well. And that link is to CAST's website, and they have so much more amazing information if you want a deeper dive. Let's see. Okay. Sorry, I have notes here. I need to get to the next part. Okay, so the second provocation, why should we care? One thing that we have common knowledge of right now is that our students are struggling. Many of them may have shared stories with you about struggles they're having, or maybe some are a bit more guarded about what they're struggling with. But I talk to students every single day who feel like right now they can't access their education, either because of the online format or because of things that are happening at home. And they're really feeling and sharing stories with me about how they feel like this shift was not designed for them. And then that's causing feelings of inadequacy and distress, neither of which set people up for good learning. In accessibility services here at Plymouth, we work with one of our most vulnerable, but also one of our most robust populations. We have 600 students that we serve currently. So that's 600 students who are very likely to have some accessibility concern with our remote learning courses. And as we heard from Rochelle Lyons yesterday, students with disabilities are not the only vulnerable population we serve, because we also have a large number of first-generation students and low-income students as well, and there is a whole lot of intersection between those groups and students with disabilities. Excuse me. So while we obviously all care about our students and we want them to succeed, but we can't really know what they're necessarily going through, because so much shame can be attached with coming from or being part of a marginalized community. So as we continue our conversation here, I wanted to share this quotation from Bell Hooks, because it really struck me in how much it describes the students that I and likely most of you serve. So it says, when educators evaluate why some students fail and some students succeed, they rarely talk about the role of shame as a barrier to learning. Okay, so shifting focus a little bit, I would like us to now think about how we can use universal design for learning to help mitigate some of these access and equity issues that I just mentioned that our students are facing. So let's think about how currently we share content. Is it primarily through lectures? Is it primarily through assigned readings or some other way? How do we currently engage learners? Do we offer them cool projects to work on, or do we threaten them with a low grade if they don't get their stuff done? What is it that we're using to get them to buy it? And then how do we know that they know what they need to know? How are we assessing learners? Is it a big cumulative exam at the end of the semester, or a formal research paper, or little quizzes all semester long? So if you just want to think for a moment, and again, I can't see what's happening in the chat or the Padlet, but I'm sure there's some really great reflections happening. So if we're going to answer these questions, how do we currently share content, engage learners, assess learners? If you found that you only have one or even two answers to the questions on the previous slide, the chances are we're not going to be reaching all of our students. So even if you only have one answer to the questions, and that answer is something traditional like a lecture, or it's more radical like ungrading or something, even with those innovative things, that doesn't necessarily mean we're reaching all learners. So diversifying is really important. So I wanted to talk a little bit, this cartoon is probably familiar to a few of you. I wanted us to think about how UDL helps us to expand access to the greatest number of learners, to help sort of mitigate that issue we just talked about not being accessible to everybody. So one of the core principles of UDL is to build access into the curriculum from the ground up, rather than retrofitting with accommodations for individual students, which is my job. However, this would be a great way for me to do less accommodating and more support of thinking about access on a design level. So yes, this cartoon, it's pretty popular. It illustrates UDL in a pretty straightforward way. So it has a groundskeeper shoveling steps in the winter, and there is a wheelchair user who is off to the side and asks, "Can you please shovel the ramp?" And the groundskeeper says, "Well, all of these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I finish that, I will clear the ramp for you." And the wheelchair user says, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." So this is just an example of how we can do something that's essential for maybe one of our students, but that can be beneficial for everybody. Especially if we're just thinking about removing the barriers from the beginning as we make design decisions, and that way more people are included in a way that is equitable. So on this next slide, using UDL principles can help us provide access to a number of things, including information, learning tools, community, and actionable feedback. So if we take those one at a time and think about information, we can upload a lecture video. We can link a book chapter or an article. You could provide a YouTube video. You can share information via a live stream, back channel, Twittery thing, Padlet, any of these things that we like to do now. You can go wild. The point is that there needs to be more than one way of providing information to students. And same for the rest of the things on this slide. What tools do we have? We look at learning tools. What tools do we have that are available to students? What tools are available to us as faculty? I've heard a lot from students about experiencing fatigue from Moodle forums, and I think that faculty would share that share that sentiment as well. So what other tools do we have available that might be more engaging? And then speaking of engagement, that links to this next principle of learning community. So how, besides like those Moodle forums I just mentioned, how are we connecting? How are we creating community, maintaining community in a time where we often feel so disconnected? And then that last one, actionable feedback. So I think now more than ever, students really need to know that the work they're doing is not going into some void once they hit send. So how can we be more creative in providing feedback that is really helpful for students to promote their learning? So all of this I know sounds really great, but then we have these real world constraints where we are being asked to redesign our courses in a pretty short period of time, and it's hard to keep all of these design principles and accessibility at the center of what we're doing. So the next slide is sort of the must dos. If we can't completely wrap our head around redesign, what are the things that we have to do to be ADA compliant or to be supportive of students who are having any sort of trouble accessing their learning? Oh, I skipped something. So what can we do? This is sort of the um, the big goal. Like if you can get there, design with inclusivity in mind, use a variety of methods to present information. Ask yourself if there are materials that some students can't access. So if you have online materials that might not be accessible to everybody because perhaps they don't have captioning, or if you have print materials that I suppose this would be more in a face-to-face environment, but print materials that are not accessible because the font is all squished together and maybe some people can't read it. And then providing choice and assessment methods. So we're really giving students an opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge in multiple ways. Okay, so that was the slide that I had skipped while I was talking, but now we're going back to those must-dos. So if you don't have time for all of the sort of aspirational stuff, what are the things we absolutely have to do? I mentioned captioning briefly. This is important because it's not just for people who have hearing impairments, though that is certainly essential for those folks, but their captions are very helpful for people who have struggles with focusing or executive function, but they're also on a practical level helpful for people who maybe don't have the internet speed that's necessary to watch a video that you've uploaded. But if you have captions, you can also provide them with a transcript. I think that I wasn't here for the full last session, but I think folks were talking about Kaltura. So in the slide deck, when you click on captioning, that links to the Moodle knowledge base about Kaltura. And I know that we have really amazing folks in IT and AT who can help with captioning as well. And that way you can provide a transcript to students who might not be able to watch the videos. The next thing we could do is think about consistent formatting. I'm just going to flip ahead a slide for a minute for an example. So this screenshot is from a Moodle course that Erica Ryberg and Lindsay Page, who's the director of Campus Accessibility Services, created probably a couple years ago. And it's just an example of one particular format you can use to make sure that the structure is the same from week to week. So students really always know where to look for assignments, where to find course information, where are the announcements going to be, where are the due dates. So I know that when I first started using Moodle, I would just kind of like throw things on there and they were all over the place and I didn't really have consistent headings. I didn't have a consistent structure, and that can be really an obstacle for a lot of students. And then providing them with a user tutorial or virtual tour of the course before you really start can be really helpful as well. And then back here. So the last thing I wrote was compassion. And while this is something that I can't necessarily give you a concrete example with a link like I can for captioning or consistent formatting, I think that compassion is something that we all share for our students. And we have choices as faculty, as librarians, administrators, collab heroes. We have choices, and those choices impact students. So if we can make the conscious choice to design for access and design for agency, to design for ownership and participation, and for experiences that are truly about students and that honor the many diverse ways of being in the world that our students bring to class, I think that we are going to be best situated to serve them. And that, I think, is it. So I have no idea how much time that took. 20
You're all good. And I'm just going to jump right in because I'm so curious about next question. And you might know the answer to this, Hannah. Do you have any sense of which you prefer for auto captioning, Kaltura or YouTube? I know you can clean up everything, but do they both seem about the same, or have you?
Yeah, so the short answer is that neither are perfect. They both have issues. They both have very similar percentages of accuracy. There's probably somebody in here that knows those percentages off the top of their head. It's not great. It's but there's not one that's like more ADA compliant than the other either. They're both just sort of adequate. And in order for the transcripts to be really good, you do have to put in the effort to go in and edit them. That said, having an 80% correct transcript that you didn't go in and edit is a whole lot better than not having one at all. And YouTube, I mean, that is a really, simple way. You can just toggle the caption on off switch and then you don't have to go through Kaltura. But I'm thinking about when you're actually recording and uploading your own lectures. That's obviously not an option. And that leaves us with Kaltura as what we've got. It's what's available. It's what we pay for as an institution. So yeah. I'm trying to look at the chat too, but maybe I shouldn't do that.
There's more questions about all of this stuff. Well, first of all, we do want to acknowledge these auto captioning do not work as well for languages other than English, and also for math, apparently we are hearing, which I can only imagine, God help you, what that looks like with the auto caption.
Right.
And you can, so they want to see a picture of a captioned video with the transcript. I have those for YouTube if you want me to pull one up, or it basically, the way YouTube works is that it automatically captions, and whether you do anything or not, you can, unless you set it improperly, you can just see those. And then you can just go in if you're the uploader of the video and edit those anytime you want, or you don't have to. And when you caption that, when the captions come, that generates the transcript. One thing to know is that takes a little time. So when you first upload, you might be like, I have no captions, but just wait and YouTube will catch up and they'll be there. Do you want to offer anything about how that transcripts work or captions or anything, Hannah?
I mean, my experience has been when I've made my own videos and downloaded the transcript. So once you make the Kaltura video, there's a little option to download transcript. I haven't done it for a few months, but I think you just click the button that says show transcript, and then you can just go in and type in the corrections. I don't have an example to give you right now.
Can I jump in and share that real fast?
Yes.
This is Jason Ninos.
Hi, Jason Ninos. Perfect. I was going to just say default to the technology folks.
Yeah, so, and before Jason takes us through it, I just want to show you in the chat, I just put a little tag there. If you are using YouTube and you do spend the time making nice captions, cleaning up the captions, if you just add, you might tag your video like, Global South or whatever you're working on in your content, but you can also add that weird tag there that I just put in YT equals whatever. And that actually automatically forces captions so that when people look at your video, it's automatically going to play with captions. And the reason I like that is not only that it's helpful for people who need captions, but it also reminds everybody to be conscious of captioning in educational videos. Like you might not want to do that if you make a movie or something that's artistic and you don't want the captions showing automatically, but for educational videos, I think adding that tag can be a nice point of advocacy. Let's turn over to Jason.
Yep. So I'm in my media on my Plymouth. You can get there by going to the Kaltura on your page. And then if I click on the pencil next to it, which I should have done it, sorry. If I click on this pencil right here, I can edit things within this video, and one of them being captions right here. And if I click on edit captions, it brings up, and you bring up the video file with the captions here. And so it plays along with it, and then you can change this, the words that appear, because obviously I didn't say Baja. And so I can just come in here and type in what I would actually say. Hello, I don't know what I actually said there, but I can click save, and yes, I want to save them. And that's the quick, easy way to change the captions. So, yep, that's it. That's how it goes.
Awesome. Thank you.
How do you get a transcript from that, Jason?
The transcript appears in the video whenever you post it someplace. So you can see the transcript is right here.
So I'm going to tune in too. So underneath that transcript, there's that download arrow right next to it. So that allows you to download the transcript. There's also something called, this is Erica Rydberg here. I'll put my video on in a second, but there's also something called an SRT file. And that's essentially an editable closed captioned file. You can use a basic text editor on your machine to edit those, and you'd find that, yeah, it's that download arrow Jason's showing right there. So there's two different ways to either download the transcription or download that captions file. And those are two different file types, just FYI.
So yeah, the transcript is just a text file. And so you can see it just looks like this. There's nothing special about it. It's just literally a blob of text. Whereas an SRT file has different codings in it. It's not going to open up because I don't have it associated with a Word document, but it's going to have different codings in it that tells the program, hey, show this text at this time. And so that's why they're slightly different. And so, yeah, that's how you would edit it if you want to download it and edit it. Otherwise, just edit it right here in the edit captions. And that's the easiest way to do it within Kaltura. The SRT file just makes it helpful that if you were posting someplace else, you can upload that SRT file with it to get the closed captioning.
I want to turn our attention to another question just so we can keep things moving. And we do have a session later that focuses specifically on students without internet, and a big chunk of that presentation has to do with sync and asynchronous learning. But particularly from an accessibility standpoint, Hannah D, do you want to say, or actually, there's lots of Hannah D's because Hannah D asked this question.
I see Hannah Dutton's question.
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about what you think about synchronous and async options?
Yep, great, yeah. So before I answer that, that's an amazing question. But I'm afraid that I'm going to forget to address something before that I saw in the chat. I think Justin Wright mentioned something about captions not working for math and somebody else for medical terms. And you're right, there is not a good, that I've found, there's not something that's really great right now, but I'm connected to some other accessibility folks everywhere around the world. And that's like one of the things that I'm sort of researching right now, is trying to figure out accessibility tools for disciplines that have really specialized language. So I don't have an answer for you yet, but it's important and I'm on it. But back to Hannah Dutton's question about balancing synchronous and asynchronous courses from an accessibility standpoint. I think that there isn't a single answer, because we need to think about the individual makeup of our class. as far as who's going to be able to access things synchronously and asynchronously. And I realized that while you're trying to pre-design for the fall term, you're not going to necessarily know your students well enough to know who's going to be able to make it to your 2 p.m. Zoom meeting and who's not, or once they're there, who's going to be able to participate fully and articulate their ideas in a sort of on-the-spot format. So what we can do, since we have to wait to kind of get to know our students, we can anticipate that there are going to be barriers to access for any time you offer something in a synchronous format. So having an alternative for those students who might not be able to do it is really going to be essential, and follows the high flex scenarios that we've been talking about.
Hannah, can you talk a little bit about students who used to be able, especially through the PASS office and accessibility services, have a distraction-free environment in order to focus, study, maybe take assessments, and maybe, you know, also benefited from some oversight from your staff?
Yeah.
What can faculty be doing to make sure they're keeping up with things and getting what they need?
Again, that, you know, compassion and flexibility is really it. There's not, you know, a tool or a switch we can flip on that's going to allow all students to have, you know, what they need to do their best learning at a given time. So if we can, you know, when we're remote especially, make it so perhaps there are not, you know, time limits on Moodle exams, or fewer time limits, whatever it is reasonable, and you still get to, you know, assess what it is that you need to assess. And I think that is an important question too, as you're offering an assessment, like really going back to basics and thinking about what is it that I need the student to demonstrate. Can this be done without a time restriction? Can I have them start it at 11 o'clock at night after all of their siblings are in bed, which is, you know, a hard situation to think about. But I mean, I just had a student at the end of last week who was trying to take their final exam and was emailing their faculty member and me just saying, I just can't do this. Like, I have 2 siblings at home and they're trying to do remote learning and we're sharing a computer. And they were additionally, even with creative, imperfect solutions like driving to a parking lot of a library to use their free Wi-Fi, this particular student came from an area that has been really, really hard hit by COVID-19 and has a parent with autoimmune disorder and didn't feel comfortable even going to drive in the to the parking lot to use Wi-Fi. So that story is not unique. That's happening for a lot of our students. So again, anytime that we can offer a more flexible option with timing is often what it comes down to for students, or that's what I've heard so far.
I think, Hannah Dutton, your idea there, I think we've done quite a bit of this with our collab, Hannah, too, is just offering students a time maybe through Zoom where if they just want to quietly work, you'll sit with them and do your own work and they can kind of check in and talk, and that kind of more open office, you know, thing. That's less about assessments or specific support and more just about like time management maybe, and accountability and emotional support, I think has been helpful.
I think that connection is really important. And just because you mentioned time management, a plug for my neighbors in the PASS office who have provided tutoring support and study skills support with a really robust program. I think Angie was on here at some point.
Angie, are you still here?
Oh yeah, hi, I can actually see you. So
hi.
They did a really...
Do you want to talk a little bit, Angie, about what you guys are offering for remote stuff or what's going on over there?
Yep.
Sure. We had a virtual PASS office Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. where there were never fewer than 3 tutors, just in a Zoom, like in the Zoom pass office. And often they chatted with each other, or they would have their volume off and just have their video on while they're sitting here reading and writing or talking to their partner or their sibling. But students could just drop in if someone stopped by and said, hey, I need help in my intro to interdisciplinary studies class. The tutors would like, oh, I've never taken that. And then try to give the student some general advice first. And then if the student really needed someone who has taken that class, the tutors would email me. I would try to find them a tutor, and then off they would go. But what I found was more students were stopping by for social help than they were for academic help for the past 2 months. They wanted someone to talk to. They wanted someone to play categories with. They weren't so much looking for academic help as they were just looking for people who were physically not present, but were present still.
Awesome. Thanks, Ange.
Welcome.
We have just about 2 minutes left of this session. So if anybody has a last question, actually that might be wrong. Hold on. Yeah, actually we have 7 minutes left. It's amazing. So if anybody has another question, we'd be happy to field it. You can just unmute yourself and ask.
Hello, Liz here. This is too big a question to ask at the end, I guess, but I guess I'm curious about what institutional plans or thinking or conversating there might have been around if we're starting up in some high flex that includes face-to-face. What is our compassion and philosophy and practice going to be around students who contract this virus? Like, I think about that, I guess, in terms of accessibility and disability, and sort of issues around like identifying students and like sending them away from class. And I'm still wrapping my head around all of that, but I guess I'm sort of curious if that's, I mean, it's a matter of access, but I feel like it's also a matter of like, I wonder and worry about the identifying / grouping of students who may be ill.
There you go.
Yeah, so there's like 30 seconds left if you could answer that. Thanks.
Okay.
I'll write down your answer.
So
would you possibly answer? But
sorry.
So what I'm thinking is that institutionally we have to have something in place, because without it, what would happen is that you mentioned students who are ill that would qualify as a disability, as a temporary disability, as far as the law goes, right? So that means that our Office of Two would be therefore creating individual accommodations for each of these ill students who are going to have different symptoms and different level of capacity to participate, which is completely unmanageable. So all I can say is that yes, we need institutional support. No, we cannot manage it in our office alone. Yes, we need the support of all of us and faculty to be compassionate, to be flexible with where and to sort of carry some of the weight where institutional support is lacking so far. I hope that doesn't end up being the case, but that's sort of the reality that we're in right now.
thank you, Hannah.
You're welcome.
Very appreciative of this. I'm sensitive about asking this question, but do you want to talk a little bit, because we do have drop-in hours Thursday and Friday, 8:30 to 5, and Hannah's going to be available for those for one-on-one help. Or let's say you're pretty sure you can figure out captioning, but you just want someone to walk through it once with you. Like, we can do more one-on-one work. But Hannah, do you want to talk a little bit about if faculty are working over the summer, what their options are for getting assistance from your office?
Sure. So so for now, for tomorrow and Friday, like I said, I'll be available for drop-in support. Starting in June, I will not be available for support for a month or so because I'm going to be furloughed as well. Lindsay, who is the director of campus accessibility, who may or may not be here. So hi, Lindsay, if you're here. I know she has a newborn, so she's maybe going to pop in, but she'll be back from maternity leave at the end of June. So any accessibility accommodation related questions can be directed towards her during that time. I am, so with furlough rules, we're not allowed to answer an email or anything like that. I am pretty connected and invested to accessibility and advocacy work outside of my role at Plymouth. So catch me on the Twitters. Maybe ask Robin and she can secretly ask a question that I'm not speaking for from an institutional perspective. But yeah, so unfortunately, access to accessibility might be a little bit limited over the summer.
Can you go ahead and drop your Twitter handle in the
oh heck yes,
chat, Hannah? And I just wanted to let you know there always is coverage because Lindsay will be there. So I just wanted you guys to have Lindsay Page's name and also Angie and her staff are around. But I also want people to understand because in my opinion, actually as point of fact, they're radically under-resourced in the best of times. So this is a challenge. So I'm